charging. Oh, how does it work? It doesn't matter, you just control it on here.
What's the story?
They're on a train, they're boarding taxis on their way over now.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just the forward and back. Exactly.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Very, very welcome today. We're delighted to see so many people here from all across the sector and from all across the country, and also very happy to have so many people from the Southwest. I'm Claire from Julie's Bicycle, and you'll be hearing more from me later on today. I just wanted to say that this is the first time Julie's Bicycle has done an event which is focused solely on museums. And we were thinking, yes, it's nice, much, makes it easier than having the whole of the sector. And then, of course, we realized what an incredibly diverse sector the museum sector is. So it's been very interesting getting ready for today, and so great to see such a diversity from across the sector here. We're really looking forward to a day of exploring, sharing and learning about what the museum sector has been doing and can do further around environmental sustainability, taking practical action, engaging audiences, visitors and communities. And we're really looking forward to some really interesting presentations and interventions from a range of different museum sector representatives and museums as well. So I'm going to start with a few practicalities. There's no fire alarm test planned, so if the fire alarm does go off, please follow the fire exit signs out of the building. The loos are outside in the corridor, just facing this room, so very easy to find. Lunch will be served at 1 o'clock and will be in this space. During lunch, please feel free to get to know everybody, to network, to have a look around the building. There's an exhibition on about the history of disability, and there's also the Wildlife Photographer of the Year exhibition, which is on. And Shed have very kindly offering tickets to the wildlife photography exhibition. If you want to see it, go down to the reception and say that you're here for the Julie's Bicycle event, and you'll be able to take a look. So thank you for that. We have the Wi-Fi for today is Shed. It's an open Wi-Fi, and you don't need any password for it. We'll be using Twitter today with the hashtags JB Museums and Coptimism. We'll have, you can see the JB Museums hashtag there at the bottom. Please do remember to sign up for the discussion groups which are happening this afternoon. There's a list out on the table, so it'd be great to know who's going to be doing what by as soon as possible by lunchtime. The event is being live streamed and subtitled by Stage Text, so hello to everybody who's listening in on the live stream. And I would past the practical bit now. I would like to just say briefly a few words of thanks to, in particular, to Southwest Museums Development Programme and to Vic, who's the person the reason that we are here today in Bristol and at MShed. And a big thank you to Arts Council England for supporting this event and making it possible. Also thanks to Good Energy, who are sponsoring the drinks reception at the end of the day. And James and Ben are here in the room, also available for any questions. If you want to talk to them about renewable energy, energy procurements, they're here for your questions. And we have our tech team here today as well. Photographer James and Walter and Paul helping us, our tech team. And we've got Stage Text as well, doing the fantastic job of subtitling to make the live streaming accessible. So thanks to everybody. So I'm going to hand over now. Can I ask Alison and David and Vic to sit up? Just here. Or not you, sorry,
Yeah.
David. No.
Yeah, that's good.
Alison and Vic, if you can just come up at the top. Sorry. It's this one here. So we've got David Martin, who's operations manager for the Bristol Culture team.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like you to welcome you to Bristol and to MShed. I hope that you find the day rewarding and informative, and also find the facilities comfortable. So, I'm David Martin. I'm the operations manager for Bristol Culture team, overseeing operations across Bristol Museum and Art Gallery, the Red Lodge, Blaise Castle House Museum, the Georgian House, and MShed. Okay, I've been asked to speak briefly today about this venue and some of the environmental improvements we have made. I've been asked to focus on what we did and why, what funding and support we had to do it, what benefits it brought, what we learned, and what we're going to do next. MShed opened to the public in 2011 after the previous Bristol Industrial Museum was redeveloped. The building's rebirth saw it now contain an integrated building management system and a biomass boiler to help it achieve efficiencies. In the 7 years since it opened, there have been a number of opportunities to improve how the building operates and performs from an environmental and economical point of view. We have undertaken various improvements, such as preventing the hot water being heated overnight 24/7, preventing the humidifiers from automatically dumping wastewater, repositioning condensing fans and changing the control system so it communicates more effectively with itself and with the building management system outstation. So I'd like to start with a bit of information about the biomass boiler that we have here and then move on to highlight some of the other improvements we have made. So just a bit in general about a biomass boiler for those who don't know. A biomass boiler works by burning wood fuel such as wood pellets, wood chip or logs to create heat. On a biomass boiler there is a storage area called a hopper where the wood fuel is kept, and then the actual boiler where the fuel is ignited. The wood fuel is automatically fed into the boiler from the hopper and then ignited by an auto start. The biomass boiler that we have installed here at MShed is a 300 kilowatt binder RRK boiler burning wood pellet. It was commissioned in 2012 and is accredited on the Renewable Heat Incentive. Since commissioning, it has produced 1.2 gigawatt hours of heat. It typically produces around 220,000 to 350 kilowatt hours per year. Use of the biomass boiler reduces gas demand for heating purposes. Based on the current gas unit rate, the biomass boiler has achieved savings of over £26,000 and reduced carbon emissions by 225 tonnes. The biomass boiler has also yielded £66,000 approximately in Tier 1 and Tier 2 payments as part of the Renewable Heat Incentive Scheme. Moving on now to look at one of the main projects we have undertaken, which includes natural ventilation and a building management system upgrade. This project involved the use of an external consultant, Kevin Williams, from a company called Hurtwood, and Bristol Council's energy team. It included upgrades to the building management system, which linked the windows to temperature and humidity sensors, opening and closing them on demand. This allowed for a dramatic upgrade on the building's heating and cooling control, and also the comfort levels in the foyer and event spaces. The project cost approximately £100,000, and it will save around £27,000 on energy bills and 100 tonnes of CO2 per year. This is the equivalent to the annual electricity consumption of 111 households. Natural ventilation in this instance also means replacing windows that can't open with ones that will, such as adding handles to windows in this space here. This means that we can now naturally ventilate some of the spaces in the building without relying on the costly air conditioning systems. Sometimes the solutions to issues don't have to be high-tech. An important note here is to monitor that the air conditioning is not on when the windows are open. I would like to explore the cost of also integrating sensors to the windows in this room so that they automatically turn the air conditioning off when they are opened. There are a number of additional benefits to this project. So improved building environment. Shed has suffered from temperature problems since it was built due to the lack of natural ventilation. Over and underheating had been reduced with this project, and improved event facilities. Shed is one of the best places to hold an event in Bristol due to its location and stunning view. This project improved comfort levels for delegates. In 2015, we introduced a large photovoltaic solar array on the roof of Shed. The solar panels capture sun's energy using photovoltaic cells, which convert the sunlight into electricity. The electricity generated from the panels is converted into DC electricity, which is then fed to an inverter, and then the inverter converts it from DC to AC, so direct current to alternating current, meaning that the electricity is now suitable for building consumption. Any surplus electricity generated by the solar array is fed back into the grid. There's a 49 kilowatt solar system on the roof of Shed, and it has generated an output of 44,535 kilowatt hours a year, and saving 23,559 kilograms of CO2 a year. The installation cost approximately £56,000. Since the time of its inception in September 2015, the solar panels have generated enough electricity to power approximately 30,000 lifts of our historic cranes, which incidentally we were able to use for both the natural ventilation project and the solar project to move materials up onto the building. We have undertaken various improvements, such as the ones I mentioned before: hot water being heated overnight, stopping that happening, preventing the humidifiers from dumping wastewater, repositioning the condensing fans and changing the control systems. But with projects such as these, and in order to identify where improvements can be made, it is important to have a good understanding of how your buildings are performing. Using the expertise of consultants and professionals is useful, but it can be costly. Building performance surveys such as CIBSE's TM22 can also be a useful tool in assessing the building's performance and identifying efficiencies. One piece of advice I could give here is that more often than not, surveys such as that will identify the biggest saving as being lighting. So sometimes replacement of light fittings can produce massive savings in the region of 80% consumption per light fitting. So that 9 times out of 10, that'll be the big saving that a survey like that will identify. When Shed was built, the lighting was relatively efficient, but there have now been dramatic developments in the LED lighting market, meaning that it would now be cost efficient to review and upgrade, as we have done at some of our other museum venues, such as Blaise Castle House Museum. We're also about to embark on a large-scale back-of-house lighting upgrade at Bristol Museum and Art Gallery. So now a little bit about finance. You've heard me talk about projects with some costs which have been as much as £100,000, and I can imagine that the reaction would be, it's all well and good making savings if you've got the capital to spend. The truth is that the majority of the finance for these projects has been externally funded through loan agreements such as the Salix Fund. Essentially, this is a loan which is paid back over a 5-year period from savings made from your utilities spend, and this has also involved support from my colleagues in Bristol Council's energy team. Savings can also be made from spending very little. This might include trying to ensure staff teams are aware of the individual impact they can make by turning lights off and computers off at the end of the day, and also developing a shared attitude and commitment to energy reduction. It could also mean simple alterations, such as relocating light switches to more convenient locations, and therefore making them easier to turn on and off when you enter rooms. I have also recently added energy consumption as a key performance indicator for the operations team, as we are controlling the premises with a commitment to reducing by 10% over the next 3 years. And we have also installed more smart meters into our premises so that we can better understand how the different areas are used. Despite all these works, our DEC certificate is still relatively poor at Shed, and I think this may be connected to the building's insulation, which is something that we're planning to investigate next. So I hope some of that was useful. Please do get in touch with me if you've got any questions you'd like to ask about any of the projects or details I've discussed today, either by email or telephone. I'm always happy to link up and share experiences and best practice. Also, if you have any interest in hiring out this or any of our other event spaces, please do contact us via the email addresses on the screen. And I hope that you find the rest of the day informative and inspiring. So thank you.
Great, thanks very much.
Hello, good morning. We're absolutely delighted to be working in collaboration with Julie's Bicycle on today's event. We hope that today presents a valuable opportunity to hear from and engage with a wide range of environmental practice currently underway within the sector. South West Museum Development is participating in today's event because we believe we have a collective responsibility to engage with environmental sustainability. All museums have the potential to play an important role in highlighting the impact of this change on local communities. We believe we can wisely and sensitively use this unique position to encourage debate and discussion. Before I share with you one example of a small coastal museum, I'd like to provide you with some regional context. South West Museum Development is one of 9 regional providers funded by Arts Council England. In the South West, we also have funding agreements with 24 local authorities across the South West region. Our function is to provide development support and advisory services to 210 accredited museums within the region, and we operate within the Arts Council England's strategic framework, Great Art and Culture for Everyone. Our objective is to meet and exceed standards, raise ambition, drive excellence, and strengthen the resilience of the sector. As a result of the additional local authority investment within our region, we have the opportunity to work beyond accredited museums, and last year directly supported 246 museums in the region. The South West is a special place. The region welcomes large numbers of visitors each year that are drawn to the spectacular natural and cultural environment and heritage. The South West is the largest tourism market outside of London and the South East, and Visit England data shows us, or rather estimates, that South West tourism is an industry worth 10.6 billion to the UK's economy. However, there is a contrast in the significant value that heritage and museums make to tourism and the benefit of these museums generate in delivering this unique function. Most museums operating in these local tourist destinations receive no public funding and very little recognition of the contribution that they make to the quality of the tourism offer. There is also a significant contrast in the scale of this museum provision. The South West Museum sector is largely comprised of small or even micro museums. They operate at low levels of investment and communications infrastructure and within networks which span large rural geographies. South West regional data carried out by South West Museum Development Programme shows us that over 30% of the sector is wholly run by volunteers. 2/3 of the sector is predominantly small independents, and half of these attract less than 10,000 visits per annum. However, the collective power of museums in the region welcomed 8.5 million visits during 2015-16. If we were to apply the AIM Economic Toolkit and their methodology for economic impact, but just focus on local and day visitors, we estimate that the 8.5 million visits during 2015-16 equates to and contributes 200 million to the region's economy. The distinctiveness of local community museums uniquely positions them to influence public opinion and raise awareness of the impact of environmental sustainability on our natural and built environment. Local museums are uniquely placed to bring these global issues into a local context. An example of this local context can be provided by Dawlish, which was placed at the centre of national attention during the 2014 storms, which hit the normally sheltered south coast of Devon and Cornwall. The 8-week sequence of Atlantic storms in 2014, the most energetic since the 1950s, equates to a 1 in 60-year event. The extensive physical and socio-economic impact of these storms highlights the vulnerability of the UK to coastal hazards. Dawlish. Dawlish is a traditional seaside town, renowned for its sandy beaches, its relaxing gardens and the quality of its cream teas. Dawlish Museum has 11 rooms over 3 floors and is run by a dedicated and skilled team of volunteers. Their collections depict life past and present in the town of Dawlish in the south coast of Devon. On the 4th of February 2014 at around 9 p.m, a combination of spring tide, 80-mile-per-hour onshore winds and a storm surge created truly terrifying large waves. The storm caused the destruction of the mainland rail route connecting the southwest to the rest of the country. Coastal wave heights exceeding 10 metres with peak wave periods exceeding 20 seconds, effectively double the norm of it in a storm, created truly terrible impact on that local area. Images of waves tearing apart the seawall defences and any attempts to restore them, along with pictures of rail track physically dangling in the air, were beamed across the nation's TV for weeks at a time. Dawlish Museum quickly recognised the importance of working with the community in order to capture the impact of these storms on the local area. Their first action was to coordinate a large social event. This big social event was held in partnership with history groups, local people and key agents, and involved a programme of contemporary collecting. This direct engagement with mostly new audiences enabled the community to share their own stories, their images and footage of the impact of the storms on their local area. Museum volunteers recorded personal histories, collected digital content and arranged for copyright. They also coordinated engagement with key parties such as the local authority and Railtrack. Their work came together in the Big Storm Archive, which you can see here. Over the next months, led by museum volunteer Andrew Wright and a team of volunteers, they created a dedicated exhibition in one of their 11 rooms, named the Storm Room. They also embarked on the production of a film following the 300-strong Orange Army Railtrack workers. This video can be purchased for $8.99 plus postage and packaging. While the storm did have a devastating physical impact on the local town, the proactive and positive approach taken by Dawlish Museum in response to the storm has had a significant impact, and it has significantly enhanced the role of the museums at the centre of their community. The Storm Room has contributed to an increase and also a diversification of their audiences. They have seen a noticeable increase in the levels of schools' engagement. They were consulted on and provided content for the production of a schools resource, Key Stage 3 to 5, on extreme weather and coastal flooding. Their social media has rocketed with a 10-fold increase in their Facebook sign-ups. This activity has also had a positive impact on the museum's own financial resilience. The Storm Room has increased admissions and also been supported with the online sale of the film. Dawlish Museum and their experience at the centre of the 2014 storms highlights the unique role of local community museums to work sensitively and in partnership in order to highlight the impact of extreme weather on local communities and their immediate environment. Whilst they did not brand their programme climate change or overtly challenge audiences regarding environmental sustainability, the combination of the exhibition, the archive and the film that they have produced highlights the unique position of local museums to open discussion around the human impact on the environment. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Many thanks.
My turn. I'll be brief. First of all, thank you very much, everybody, for coming. It's great to see you all here, and I hope you enjoy the day and that we hear a lot more from everybody here. For those of us who are following the climate narrative, which is probably everybody in this room, we've been turning our heads towards Bonn and the climate negotiations known as COP23 over the last couple of weeks, placing our faith in this unique conference to provide the leadership needed to move us all towards a sustainable society that holds environmental sustainability as a cherished core value. But what if the key to the global framework for ecological integrity lies embedded in the very fabric of culture? You know where I'm going. What if the solutions that we seek to the climate challenge run like golden threads, weaving through our communities not simply as individual or collective actions, but as very deeply enmeshed in our cultural narratives? And I think the people in this room today will understand that very profoundly. Despite an increasing sense of urgency, though, that we all feel, 2/3 of people have never had a conversation about climate change, ever. That's 2/3, 2 in every 3. We need, therefore, not just to find solutions to our environmental challenges, but to address the cultural climate for environmental action and engagement. And it is very difficult to really pinpoint exactly what hinders climate progress. The obvious one that we all feel deeply, I think, is, as Paul Hawken put it quite some years ago, we have an economy where we steal from the future, sell it to the present, and call it GDP. It's a beautifully simple way of putting it. Human consumerism has lodged itself into our culture as the dominant economic and therefore everything else type of narrative. It's such a powerful ideology, and we're so entrenched in it in our everyday lives that it's very difficult to lift our heads up above the parapet and see beyond it. Even using the word environment, and I'm sure all of you agree that the terminology about climate, environment, sustainability is hugely problematic. It implies a sense of detachment, as if the natural world is somehow out there, separated and detached from us humans. Oddly, nature doesn't seem to include us. We have yet to embed within our society a consensus for a narrative of ecology in the purest sense of the word, a deeply felt understanding that all life on Earth interconnects, exists beyond human-made hierarchies and structures, and that every single action we take as individuals, as communities, as nations will impact the entire ecosystem. Julie's Bicycle has just released last week the Sustaining Great Art report on the Arts Council England's environmental programme, which demonstrated not just impressive reductions, which are actually so materially important, but also a lot of inspiring creative responses from across the cultural community, including museums and galleries, and many of you in this room will know what I'm talking about. Not only are more cultural organisations involved in the climate movement than ever before, and it's not just in the UK, this is an international movement, but the sector's greenhouse gas emissions, which are so important and so difficult to talk about, have reduced substantially. The Arts Council initiative alone, and that's only one initiative, has generated at least £11 million worth in savings, but actually more importantly, I think, is stimulating a cultural ecology which puts sustainability at its heart. That is jobs, it's new roles, it's new goods, it's new services, it's new activities, it's new missions, it's new governance priorities. And even more crucially, the report highlights the artistic outputs and responses that are inviting audiences to be part of something different. Today, we're going to hear a lot about museums and how we're bringing together the big stories of human culture and the values which shape them. Many of you are already reframing environmental action, seeing it as an opportunity to create stronger and happier organisations for you and for the communities that you serve. You know where I am going here. I've landed. What an incredible purpose for museums. What an incredible purpose. More so perhaps than any other cultural format. Museums as heritage organisations, as stewards, as custodians of cultural values, past, present and future, have an incredible job on your hands. This framework captures some of your work, supported by Arts Council in consultation with many of you, and the response from the sector has been really extraordinary in wanting to be involved and giving the best of yourselves to the ideas in it. It covers an overview of sustainability action and practice, beautiful examples of work, a summary of legal funding and other requirements, and an overview of what's out there to support you, the guidance, the tools and the networks. And so thank you for coming. Thank you for listening if you're on the live stream. And please do, all of you, continue to contribute and give your ideas to it. And here's to change. Thank you very much.
Thanks. So now I'm going to hand you over to Honor Bedard, who's curator of temporary exhibitions at Welcome Collection, and she's going to speak to you about their experiences and how it really demonstrate the roles of museums and collections in this climate change debate. Excuse me. Thank you, Honor.
Hello. So my name is Honor Bedard and I'm an exhibitions curator at Welcome Collection in London. And I want to begin by saying a huge thank you to Julie's Bicycle for inviting me to speak at today's event, but also for providing a space for us all to discuss this very critical question of the role that museums can play in creating sustainable futures. I'm going to talk today about some of the programming that Welcome Collection has been doing over the last year, engaging our visitors on environmental themes. But I want to begin by briefly looking at Welcome Collection's particular approach. This will, I hope, provide some context for the exhibitions that I'm going to go on and talk about, but also, for me, it's a starting point from which to think about the role that museums can play in civic life. For those of you not familiar with us, Welcome Collection is a free museum and library whose programme looks at the culture of medicine. It does so by bringing together science, medicine, life and art to explore how people think and feel about health. We address topics that do not sit within one single discipline, and this allows us to unite objects and works of art from different fields and different perspectives. Topics have ranged from forensic medicine, consciousness and the voice, through to our current exhibitions on the role of graphic design in healthcare and the West's relationship with Indian medicine. Welcome Collection does not operate on a model of science communication, nor does it operate on a public health model. What underpins our approach is a commitment to the idea of museum programming as a form of investigation. Ken Arnold, our former head of public programmes, described Welcome Collection's approach by citing a formula first put forward by the academic Stefan Collini. That experience plus reflection equals understanding. It's an approach that's been applied very successfully in the humanities, in contrast to that second equation, skills plus information equals knowledge, that Collini argues has found more success within the sciences. And it's in this very subtle distinction, I think, between knowledge and understanding that we begin to find a suggestion of how museums can be active and positive participants in civic life. Understanding is a process. It's an active and mindful form of engagement. It involves thinking things through, and it's unquestionably relational. Understanding depends on the qualities of the understander. In so doing, it frees us from this quest for objective knowledge. It allows for a messy, tangled, and contradictory world. But most importantly, it offers a space for fresh ideas, for fresh thoughts, and it prepares us for change. Welcome Collection is, as many of you I'm sure will know, funded by Welcome, a global charitable foundation devoted to improving health. Over the last few years, the Trust has been developing a strand of work entitled Our Planet, Our Health, that aims to establish a community of researchers taking on the challenges that food systems, increasing urbanisation and climate change pose to our health. At Welcome Collection in the museum, our year of nature programming enabled us to explore some of these same environmental questions, but in a very, very different way. We were able to broaden that inquiry to ask not just where are we going, but how did we get here in the first place? It allowed us to consider the philosophical and historical origins of our beliefs about the natural world. And by doing so, it put those environmental issues into a social and cultural context allowing us to address the cultural perceptions of our visitors. So the year began with Making Nature, an exhibition that explored the relationship between humans and animals. It examined the narratives about nature that have been created by science and how these have been made manifest in the more traditional natural history museums and in zoo design. The exhibition started in the 18th century with the arrival of taxonomy, the science of naming and classifying organisms. And this moment signalled the point at which we begin to believe in rational explanation for the differences that we perceive between us and other animals. The exhibition was curated and designed with a very strong emphasis on physical interaction with the objects and the space. So we see here Canadian artist Abbas Akhavan's ethically taxidermy animals, discreetly placed in low-lit corners in poses that acknowledge they are dead. They forced people to bend down to sometimes resist the urge to reach out and touch these animals, to think about the size of their bodies in relation to the creatures before them. We did receive a small number of comments that some visitors found these distressing. Interestingly, not one visitor commented on the 19th century taxidermy foxes raised on a pedestal in a glass museum case, hunting trophies from another era. The two-way mirrored wall that you see behind the foxes was created so that visitors in room 3, the section on zoos, could look back upon their fellow visitors in room 2 and observe them as they moved around, themselves becoming exhibits. So the purpose of this emphasis on interactivity was to encourage people to reflect on the value of embodied knowledge. What information does our body understand without conscious thought? Why is this kind of knowledge important? How might it compare and contrast with the information that we are given in traditional natural history museums or other scientific institutions? So that was the end of Exhibition 1, but where could we go from here? How could the second half of our nature-themed year explore these environmental questions in a way that was perhaps more meaningful or more relevant? For our second exhibition, we turned to our visitors and we ran 10 pop-up sessions in our reading room, a hybrid space of library, gallery and events. The visitors were asked, what is nature? What does it mean to you? What object would you put in a museum of modern nature? And the events provoked incredibly wide-ranging discussion, conflicting viewpoints, some very personal accounts and memories, very passionate polemics. And I want to read just a few of the hundreds of questions and statements that came out of these events. Is nature the government's responsibility, or is it ours? How do you get beyond the environmental message? It's a stuck record. How do you get the excitement back? If we don't use genetic modification, we can't feed a growing population. When you talk about conservation, it's in reference to saving ourselves. And lastly, I don't think we can any longer make a distinction between nature and the man-made. That gives you a flavour of just some of the very wide-ranging discussions that were taking place. And we also went out and we ran workshops with groups from the local community. So the first was a group of women originally from Bangladesh who now live in central London. The second, those who attend the Camden branch of Age UK. And we also worked with an inner-city school to do an extensive project with Year 9 boys and artist Verity Jane Keefe to explore their views on the future of the environment. At the end of this process, what struck us most was what we perceived as a gap between people and policy. How do you get beyond that so-called stuck record? How could we, as a museum, explore environmental themes in a way that connected with people's behaviours and their values? So we decided to step back and to let our visitors create their own museum of nature. We did a massive call out, asking people to bring us an object that represented their relationship to the natural world. And we asked them to tell us the story behind it. So over 3 days in May, we received everything you can imagine, from an oxygen cylinder to a slice of bread, musical instruments through to a sliver of plastic turf, and much, much more in between. And we photographed everyone and we collected their stories, and I want to show you just some of those images briefly. One week later, a team of individuals who each relate to nature in a different way chose the objects that would go on display in Wellcome Collections Gallery. They included a London park manager, a plant scientist, the first woman to climb Everest, an urban shaman, a sustainability practitioner, a farmer, and a materials expert and maker. The result was this exhibition, a museum of modern nature, an incredibly human, tender exhibition that was at times funny, both joyful and sad. We stripped the gallery of virtually all interpretation, save for the voices of those 56 individuals whose objects were on display, many of which could be heard directly on individual headphones by each object, explaining in their own words why it represented their relationship to nature. So why did we do it? We know that museums are changing. The role of the curator, its visitor, and its objects are all being rethought. This idea of museums as bastions of authority or purveyors of received wisdom is outdated. I was struck by an article in a recent issue of the Museums Journal by journalist Rob Sharp, who pointed out the risks that an educational approach of passively giving information can carry in entrenching opinion rather than changing it. By sharing their stories, we encouraged the visitors who took part in a Museum of Modern Nature to become more active and mindful contributors. Stories stop us from sitting outside of an experience. It's popular culture and narrative that shape how people think and ultimately act. At Wellcome Collection, we do not aim to take a didactic approach, and we do not advocate the values of everyone that we give a platform to. What drives us is a belief in our responsibility to create a space for discussion and a space for experimentation, both by us and by our visitors. That thinking things through that I mentioned at the beginning of my talk. When I'm speaking about a Museum of Modern Nature, in hindsight, it all sounds relatively straightforward. It most certainly was not. We embarked on a project in which until 6 weeks before it was due to open, we had no idea what content, if any, we would have. But what we did carry with us was a belief that our visitors had something important to say, and that we had a role to play in creating a space for them to do so, a space in which they felt they had some ownership. As we face the future, there are complex and difficult questions to be asked about who decides what are the right decisions to be made in relation to the environment. Museums are a space where different disciplines, perspectives and cultures can be brought together on a neutral playing field. Our own particular collections and programmes will offer opportunities that are unique to each of us. But what unites all of us is our audiences. They are one of our biggest assets, and we must use them. The museum's framework that Julie's Bicycle launches today covers every aspect of creating a more sustainable museum. And our audiences also have a role to play in that. What knowledge might they share with one another that fits within our organisational objectives? How might we create frameworks to help them do that? One of the greatest gifts we might give them could just be each other. And it's in this way that museums can build bridges. Bridges between knowledge and understanding, bridges between communities, and bridges between people and the world around them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honor. So I'm going to introduce you now to Sabrina Mahfouz. Sabrina is a poet, a playwright, and a writer. Her work has won critical acclaim, and she's going to bring her own personal perspective to today and the themes of today, and perform a selection of her poetry for us. Thanks, Sabrina.
Oh, I have to use this one because I don't know them off by heart. And that's all right. And I'm reading them from my phone. Sorry. Very hectic morning. So, yeah, it's very nice to be here. And even though I am a poet, can I close the computer? Or that? Yeah, thanks. I originally... Oh, sorry. You know who I am now, so it's all right. Yeah. I originally studied classical archaeology at King's College for a year, until I realised I was really rubbish at it, and changed to classics and English literature, which I was slightly better at. But the reason I did classical archaeology is because I wanted to work in museums, and when I did change to classics, I still kept one of my units as Greek and Roman antiquities in the British Museum. And then when I was doing my MA, I applied to the FASTream, the Government Civil Service Graduate Scheme, to work in the National Archives in Kew, and I got in, but they were like, there is no FASTream position at the National Archives. Like, FASTreamers don't want to go to the National Archives. And I was like, oh, but I do. And then they said, well, you have to go somewhere else. So then the only thing that was left by them was the Ministry of Defence. So that was the demise, really, of my journey into heritage and museums. But through various things, I ended up being a poet, and it started to come back. So I got a job as poet in residence for a climate change and arts charity called Cape Farewell, who were associated with the Science Museum. So that started a process of working a little bit with museums. And then this year I've been working with the V&A, doing stories about Middle Eastern stories with the focus on girls and young women, and I've also been associate curator at the Science Gallery London, which doesn't exist yet in a proper space, but had an exhibition on in a temporary space in Peckham, and I'll read some of the poems that I wrote for that exhibition. So that's basically just to say that all of the issues that I'm interested in exploring in my work, I'm interested in exploring them in partnership with museums and galleries, because of all the reasons that everybody who's already spoken has so articulately said, how important they are and who they engage with. And it's really the only place where, as a kid, everyone goes there. Well, most people go there. Like, most schools go to museums at least a little bit. So when I do theatre and everyone is really excited about it and it's going to reach all these people, I'm like, well, it's not, because like no one's really going to come except people who already know all this stuff, whereas museums are different. So that's why I'm always excited to work with them. So I'm going to read a little one about climate, because the other ones I'm going to read aren't about climate at all, but they're about blood, which I guess could, nature. Oddly, we're not connected to nature, that I'll reconnect us with nature by doing poems about blood. So this was written for LSE when I was at Cape Farewell. They were doing a project with LSE to try and get people from outside the climate department interested in climate. And it was part of a slam, so lots of the students came and read their poems about the environment. I want to say something, but I don't know what to say. I'm here on this stage and there's so many things to bring into this space between me and you, so how to choose. Do I tell you about how pollution is defined in UK law as contamination of the land, water or air by harmful or potentially harmful substances? The thing with this is, it reminds me of things that bring me memories of the kind of contamination that comes from hard hearts and melting hands. No matter who you get to pay for clearing it up, somehow the space remains for branches of pain to travel to all parts parts of a place. Like when street drains overflow and the trickles of rain are just low enough to keep the puddles the same size, big enough to surprise you with splashes from cars with no sound, yet small enough this time to not let you down. But then that sounds like it could be quite a depressing poem. So do I talk about her, the woman in charge of changing policies and plans, who stands stuck to sinking sand, one arm held up by concrete promises, who makes me believe that believing in something is not something I'd recommend if that something is someone, but perhaps that's been done. So it could then be about why Qatar emits 36.9 tonnes of CO2 emissions whilst the African average is 0.9 tonnes, but that sounds like a whole lot of sums for a poem. I could say something about the golden days of the industrial age that has left the UK at number 5 in the historical emissions list and caused it to leave a carbon footprint double that of China's, despite the print it makes on a map taking up just 0.05% of Earth mass. But again, I'm not sure you came here for a history class. What about talking about what I know? That way, we'll leave pretty early. I know that the UK might be reducing emissions emitted here, but we buy things from places that crisscross skies and seas like gangsters' cheeks well healed to push up their statistics and leave ours covered in unwanted bits of plastic that end up unbought in charity shops and permanently placed in lumps of landfill. I know there's ways to make things righter than they are right now anyway. There's technologies and scientists and activists and inventors who have answers to take us escalate into progress without having to undress the matter that makes us breathe. But business bosses and money loss protection officers aren't too keen to hear these solutions. Confusion over stock market value and failure, allowing them to keep the illusion that the only way to live how we live now is to live how we live now. I know that I love my city, even though it's built on the blood of empires and the ashes of slum bodies burnt in fires and plague bits and priceless bits of other people's lives. I know that I can never really know any of this, and it's getting a bit serious for a Tuesday. So maybe I should just say something about the suburbs, the outside of the world's centres, the used cars parked in the old car park of the Organ Inn, neon signs saying bargain above where the wind used to blow the bus drivers in, recycling bins placed in the wrong place. This is not the type of place where plastic disposal takes precedence over convenience. You get the sense that this has never been the right place for anything, really. So how will anything really change? I look to the ceiling and think, okay, what about the weather? You know it's getting wetter, getting hotter, colder, sinking, brink of land and sea, kissing closer. But maybe you like Wellington boots and bikinis and these things don't bother you at all. There must be something better to say to you, make you care. But like a calligrapher working with Arabic letters, making disallowed images with elongated vowels, sometimes, somehow, a poet can make all the sounds and not really say anything out loud. So I'm going to just read a small selection of poems from Bloodlines, just to give a sense of how nice it is to have words respond. Well, no, because that's saying my poems are nice, but just gives a different thing to what you can see sometimes in museums and galleries that have nothing to do actually with what the artist intended them to do, but it brought a different group of people into the gallery, and it was quite fun. And this one's called The Swarm, and it was a big canvas by Elaine Whitaker about with mosquitoes that she'd captured in wax. It looks so much nicer than it sounds. And there's a lot of swearing in it, so I won't swear because of the cameras. I'd flipping kill mosquitoes all day long, mate. The only living thing I don't give one crap about. The way they buzz around, that abominating sound, it's beyond frustrating. So insistent, like they need you to know what they're about to do, you know? Which is mad when you think about it, because what they're about to do is suck the blood right out of your body into theirs, and if you squash them, you'll see it, a stain of your own blood right up on the wall like a piece of flipping art at the Tate or wherever. They'll take over the world one day. The original drones they are. Let you know they're coming, but by then it's too late. By then your blood is already theirs, but they won't wait to see the heat of orange life drain out of you like the so-called pilots stuck in front of a military-grade screen do. Instead, they'll invite their mates to come have a feast too, and then there you have it. There's a flipping swarm of flying creatures making the air heavy with your blood. And the thought of them taking my blood without my permission, without my consent, without my nod of approval at what they're using it for, that's what really freaks me out. And that's why I'm ready to kill every mother flipping last one of them. Bad Blood, which was a response to a performance artist who was knitting with wool through her menstrual blood. So this is why art is important. Challenge those taboos. I am charged 5% to catch the blood with cotton stubs, blood that makes it possible for me to be paid 18% less than a being who does not bleed each month. But a woman of worth, a woman worthy of being a woman you want, is a woman who pays 50%, a woman who says, I am independent and do not need you to pay for me. Just because I bleed does not mean I am weak. I cannot be hung out to dry after the slaughter, right? And then this one was slightly farewell when we went to the Highlands to do the Shetland Islands, to do a little tour around their fish factories. Transfusion. I see silver pipes flow down from the ringed farm like a deep diving paddling pool to the practical rectangular factory where soundless shocks of lightning bring sustainable salmon to our supermarkets, cut gills dripping blood into water that soon will be burnt blue again. This transfusion, fish, pipes, factory, esophagus, tubed and timed with tremors of life, meeting death, leaves me vegan. And I'm going to leave you with a last one here called You Butte, which was in response to an artwork by the Hotham Street ladies, who actually do lots of environmental based graffiti in Australia. But this particular piece that they did is about challenging the womb not being used in that sort of like way that other genitalia of men is used in public toilets. I think that was the point. And it's done with all like little bits of sweets and stuff in male toilets. Womb envy is, of course, what it is. Karen Horney knew this in 1905. Freud, I'm actually just realised it's probably totally inappropriate because it actually has quite a lot of rude words in it. So, it's really difficult for me to find appropriate conference poems because I generally write about sex work. So, anyway, I am going to write an appropriate poem for you at the end of the day based on all the wonderful discussions that I will be listening to and writing as we go along, and I look forward to that moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. We're really looking forward to hearing what you have to say at the end of the day. And Sabrina will be here partaking for the rest of the day as well. I would like to ask the panel to come up, please. Phil? Isabel? Chiara. Should I? Hi. Sorry, I'm just trying to. I've just got to restart. Okay. Okay. Hold on. That's okay. It's come back. Oh, the projector. Where am I going?
live stream. I'm Isabel Wilson. I'm from Arts Council, Senior Manager of Collections, and really delighted with a very expert panel, not totally diverse, but very expert. And we'll have a really interesting debate, I hope. So while they're giving their brief presentations, please be thinking about your questions, those of you in the room and those of you online as well. The question that the panel are going to be thinking about and presenting to you is about the role of museums and collections in the 21st century in the context of climate change. So great in terms of those questions. We're looking at the relationship between well-being and environmental sustainability and how museums could contribute to a society in which well-being and environmental sustainability are principal values. In terms of our panel, our first speaker will be Henry Lee, who is Head of Collections and Keeper of Zoology at the University Museum, University of Manchester's Museum. We'll be followed by Kevin Gosling, Chief Executive of Collections Trust. Next is Phil Collins, who's a board member from Heritage Lottery Fund South West and an independent expert advisor. And then Tony Butler, I'm sure lots of you will know, founder and project Trust. We'll have roughly 5 minutes per session and then very much over to you for a start.
Can we start with someone who's not Henry, just because we need to restart the projector? Sorry, Henry.
My improv skills are brilliant. Right, can I...
Does anyone not have slides, I guess?
The three of us don't have slides, only
Okay,
Henry.
great.
So I've got loads of different media. Hello. I'm going to start this undiverse panel. You could go to the Happy Museum website. It's like open your textbooks up at the Happy Museum website for further information, but I am definitely going to talk for 5 minutes. So Happy Museum was founded in 2012, and it was prompted by a lot of the work we were doing with the New Economics Foundation, who for many years have looked at different ways to measure well-being and what a good economy looks like. We envisaged a holistic approach to well-being and sustainability. And an early influence was a collection of essays in a book edited by Joe Smith and Andrew Sims, Why Good Lives Shouldn't Cost the Earth. And they were short essays which looked at what individuals can do to contribute to good well-being. So we believe that communities and individuals are most able to address the challenges of climate change. Were also the ones with the highest levels of well-being and cohesion. And we thought museums were uniquely placed to promote those values. They're social spaces and places for encounters. They take the long view of history. They have nothing to sell, apart from the ubiquitous gift shop, except learning, engagement and enjoyment. And they are sanctuaries from commercialism. So since 2013, we've funded 22 museums in England and Wales to carry out projects and interventions to promote the values of sustainability and well-being. So a couple of examples of those were the Garden Museum down in London, which worked with a women's group from a local housing estate to explore the ethics of the winter cut flower trade. We work with Canterbury Museums. They're working with Encounter Arts, Animate Arts. They created a pharmacy made of recycled paper, which dispensed well-being treatments across the city. And in the Ceredigion Museum in West Wales, they work with a social enterprise training young people to create new tools from old, inspired by the old collections, which were then sold to the public, the profits being shared by community and by the museum. So since then, 25 other museums are now part of an affiliate scheme, ranging from the People's History Museum in Manchester, the National Trust, and Culture 24. And we're working with Culture 24 to explore what good digital looks like. Not good as in the best, good as in digital that gives you that contributes to a good life. And we are exploring setting up an international affiliate scheme, having interest from the US, Canada, and Scandinavia. We think that these sorts of projects are the sorts of things that give our communities and our individuals who use our museums the agency to make change. Now, within Happy Museum, we follow 6 key principles, which I'm just going to run through. That we think museums should create the conditions for well-being. We think they should help people connect, give back to the community, to keep learning, to take notice of the world around them, and to be more physically active. Secondly, we want all our museums to encourage people to be active citizens, using, as we said earlier, local issues to explore global challenges. We see museums have an important role to play in helping us learn for a more resilient future, because museum learning is all the things formal learning isn't. It's non-judgmental, it's active, and it's fun. We believe museums should be stewards for the future as well as the past, looking at the entire ecology of our museums and not just our collections, but the natural environment too. We want our organisations to pursue mutual relationships with all our communities, sharing and making sure that we are that old authoritative didactic role of the museum can be shared across our communities. And lastly, we want our museums to measure what matters, to encourage learning, evaluation for learning that helps us be better. And our latest piece of work is involved with an old friend of the museum, the Happy Museums, Andrew Sims, who's helping us work towards a festival of change and looking at issues around rapid transition. This will help us spotlight narratives in the past where we have, as a society, changed rapidly, because time is of the essence with climate change. And so that the notion that a museum can help people understand how we can rapidly transition to a higher well-being and more environmentally responsible society. Again, it's our next piece of work. So thanks for listening, and enjoy the rest of the...
Hopefully it comes back on in a second. Brief interlude noise.
I'm going to wait for that to come down. It's not quite a good background, isn't it? Can we have some Vivaldi instead? And something more ethnic. Yeah. Anyway, hello. Thank you for inviting me. I'm going to talk about particularly my time when I was director of Torquay Museum, which I left in 2014, because I think it provides some examples of the practical application of the sort of things that Tony's just talked about. Happy Museum funded one of our key projects, and the whole philosophy, in a way, underpinned what we were trying to do. There were really 3 sort of philosophies that came together. One, Torquay Museum is, like many Victorian first half of the 19th century museums, was founded by a society, a natural history society and an archaeology society, with the key aim of going out, exploring the environment, finding things, describing, educating, engaging people in that world out there. We had a situation in Torquay where huge amounts of environment, lots of stuff going on. It's, it's the second largest urban conurbation in Devon, but still, if you go out to Berry Head, you can see more SSI's sites of special scientific interest from that point than anywhere else in England. So extraordinary in that richness, with a lot going on, museum completely disconnected from it. And then thirdly, it's a pay-to-view. It's a charity. It's not local authority funded. It had 4 core staff. How on earth could we get more people through the door in a settlement that had somewhere around 35 visitor attractions, ranging from Paynton Zoo to local history, private sectors, dinosaur museum, all that. So our fundamental philosophy was bringing together the type of approach Happy Museums described with a real belief that actually people's well-being is improved by being out in that environment. And underpinning that was how the hell do we make money for the museum? Can we get people from that outdoor environment, which lots of money was being pumped into visitors to that, to come into ours? So we developed the thesis that our community was people who engage with the environment, or should be. More of a sort of science community than a locality community, if you like. And that it is about how do you get people from the place that's Torquay. Believe it or not, 30% of primary school children have never been to the sea. Torquay is a coastal town. extraordinary figure, huge deprivation. How do you get them out into the environment, but how do you make them part of the museum community and make the museum and its collections relevant? And over a period of a number of years, with variety of funding, we looked at some core markets. So we looked at early years, joint project with the local authority and other museums, 3 museums in Torbay, to get children out into the environment, but also to come back into the museum and use it as its core base for those activities, and to look at elements of the archaeology collection, for example. Primary school, we were in a partnership with an organisation, a community interest company called Play Torbay, that was funded by Play England and Sports England, which was the fundamental philosophy for them was about quest, the idea of exploring, whether that is play or the natural environment. They ran 5 nature reserves, so we could use them as a vehicle for going out and using art, drama, animation, and particularly one theatre company called Fortbeard Fantasy, if anybody's ever come across them. They're fantastic, wonderful animation, particularly one on the carbon weevil, which is all about climate change. But they co-authored with the children events within the museum using parts of our collection, but also collected material from the coast and beaches, where you can see the 6 levels of sea level change over the last 10,000 years. So you can discuss that climate change agenda and what's going to happen in the future. Secondary school, we had Happy Museum funding for a thing we called First Spark, which was basically designed by a group of secondary school children who were brought together by our educational reference group of teachers. And we did very much like Welcome did in a way, which was say, well, what are your issues? What do you want to do? And they chose climate change and ecocide, the demise of ecology, as their core vehicles, core interests. And we ended up with them organising a court case in which they tried Torbay local authority. God bless them, Torbay played and the councillors came. And it's all about that, raising social awareness, making them part of the community, understanding the issues and how the policy connection might work. And then if you look at an older range of people using different techniques, we used a project called Parishscapes, which is about using the tithe map with U3A to look at that and see how the environment's changed. From that, they went out and looked and surveyed at real things out there. They collated information like historic photographs of the environment, of the farm world out there, the landscape, one of those huge things that we as museums quite struggle with, which is, our greatest heritage asset is out there. It's the landscape, really, and the influence of people. How on earth do we collect that? So they tried to do that. And they went out and they identified things that no one knew about, former medieval allotments. There'd been a whole series of dew ponds that had all been filled in. And when we look back at the historic collections, we found some rare species that are now Biodiversity Action Plan specialities. And as a result of that, there was actually a working party who went out with farmers and recreated more ponds, conserved the allotments and conserved the lime kilns. And one of the things which didn't come off, but we'd hoped to come off, was having a live camera with the greatest horseshoe bats, European protected species, in the lime kilns that would be then viewable in the museum, and all those sort of links. So, and all sorts of little things that you can do, and particularly the sort of philosophy of us being the hub where people came, groups would meet. We would host the Environment Agency's panel, community engagement over Dawlish Warren, which came up as Dawlish, but there's a big spit across the estuary there, which is under great threat of being removed by climate change. Hosting all sorts of different groups, and particularly sort of taking the view that we should be a centre for shepherding information data shepherds, so that we made available, we were collecting if you like, modern, the sort of thing Dawlish were doing, modern film of what's going on out there, what's happened environmentally, that sort of evidence of change, and trying to bring things together. There are so many websites out there that people can even look up listed buildings on. You can get to them by about 30 different ways. So how do we help people? And running with it, training courses and apprenticeships. So quite a meshing together of different things. So hopefully that's given sort of a few ideas of some things that have happened. You know, there are all sorts of things in there that didn't work, which is always the best sort of learning. But thank you.
Well, good morning. So I'm from Collections Trust. For those of you who don't know us, we help museums capture and share the information that gives objects meaning. And we're best known for Spectrum, the collections management standard. And we've just published Spectrum 5, the 5th edition of that. And amongst the many changes in that, one small change, which I want to focus on, is that we've changed all reference to permanent collections to long-term collections. Now, I went into museums about sort of 30 years ago, and that was absolutely the language we used, permanent collections. And when we considered what we meant by stewardship, it was very much a model of carrying forward collections, for the benefit of future generations, as though what future generations would really want from us would be stores full of fairly poorly documented stuff. And I think that model has changed quite a lot, and I've been sort of thinking a lot about what a sustainable future for the sector might look like. And I'm just very struck by how the museum sector has expanded, even in the time that I've been working in it. There are many buildings that were not, didn't exist, or certainly were not used as museums then. If you think of all of the stuff that has been collected in the last 30 years, and we're now sort of at a situation where, as the Museums Review reminded us, last week, many museums are struggling to manage the collections that they have now. But as we'll be sort of talking, I'm sure, today, museums have to keep moving. There are things, there are ideas, there are inventions that haven't been invented yet, there is art that hasn't been created yet. And if you think about all of the material that is out there that you might want to be collecting in the coming decades, even over that sort of, say, 30-year time span, it just doesn't add up. So we're going to have to get really serious about adopting a different model of stewardship. And the one I'd like to sort of propose, and that I hope we can talk about, is instead of this idea that we are assembling collections which then have to be kind of carefully passed on in their entirety to grateful future generations, that we actually think more about the model of, say, woodland stewardship, where in order to preserve the wood and pass that on to future generations, actually you have to do some fairly brutal woodland management that involves a fair amount of lopping, and I'm sure many of you know more about that than I do. But it seems to be, it's a valid model, and actually it seems to me it's the only possible model if we aspire to carry on collecting to remain relevant. The greatest threat to collections and museums is irrelevance, so we have to collect to remain relevant to our audiences and the things that they are interested in. And really, in order to do that, we have to think differently about stewardship and what that means. Okay.
I can't do a presentation without PowerPoint. I'm sorry, it's just me. It's just like second nature. So I'm going to talk about something that's a little bit different, which is looking at trying to join some of these bits up. We've got the 5 ways to well-being, talking about the survival or otherwise of museums, and also about their role in society and in creating a better world. And so I'm just going to throw out some slightly disruptive ideas about how we might think of some of this stuff a little bit differently. And so I think the common thread that I'd like to get across, just to kick off, is about how can we think of a culture of flourishing in all of those things, whether that's individually, in society, our economy, our museums, or in the wider world. And the thing that I'd really like to focus on as well is it's very dangerous to make the assumption that you go straight from information to action What we're interested in is action. It's not about people knowing stuff, it's about people knowing useful stuff that they can then use. So I've done a great big presentation because there's 5 minutes is no time at all, but I'll send this round, and the idea is that you get something useful from it. So give your, RSI a rest and don't worry about that too much. I thought would be interesting to think about is in museums we talk an awful lot about the 5 ways to well-being, and just as a slightly disruptive idea, I thought I would turn it around and think, well, how do we apply that to ourselves? If the museum was a person, what would it mean to connect and be active and take notice and to give and keep learning? Rather than us just saying to the public, these are the things that are good for you, what might that look like for us? And I think just to add my own two in the end, I really like to have a laugh, I really like to enjoy myself, and I also really like to take it easy sometimes. So I would make a plea for those to be added on. I'd also, just to point out a bit that climate change communication often has these 4 fatal flaws in it, that people don't do stuff because they don't know about it. Everybody knows about climate change. That's not the issue. In some ways, knowing too much about it inhibits action. Fear and visions of catastrophe might sell films, they might sell video games, but they're not a future that I think any of us would like to live in. So if you look at computer games, they're generally either zombie apocalypse, Blade Runner post-truth world, Mad Max, apocalypse after the... None of us would like to live in that world, but they give us a bit of a straw man to think about, well, what kind of world would we like to live in? One size fits all, completely fatal, and the idea of using the mass media as the means for communication. The mass media is a very poor quality form of communication. The other idea I'd like to try to introduce is that engagement is often very mistakenly thought of as something that happens almost like a lesson. It happens in the museum. Climate change engagement is what happens in the hour and a half when you're in the museum. I engaged with someone. It's totally the wrong way around. The engagement is how that thinking, feeling and doing is woven into people's lives beyond the museum. So rather than separating out the engagement and the impact, this different way of thinking about it, it makes it the same thing. So our job, I think, in museums is to help people critically evaluate what they want to do when they're in a shop, in a garage, choosing a holiday, choosing some clothes, anything. Climate change engagement is how they negotiate what they think, what they feel and what they want to do at that time. And our job, I think, is to help that to be congruent. What do people want? What's important to them? And how can they do it? So if we take this, this is from CBT, thoughts create feelings, feelings drive behaviour. Thoughts don't drive behaviour. There's a great big bit in the middle, and if you think about in our museums, we are so heavily emphasise the information and often pay very little regard to the impact that information has on people. And then what happens afterwards is kind of left to its own devices. So if inspiration is I love this, inspiration is the feeling that moves you to action. So this isn't all this stuff that we're talking about today. It's not about turning everyone into environmentalists. It's not into persuading everyone that they're wrong and I'm right. It's about working with people and working with people as their best selves. So I love the idea of my best self when I'm doing the stuff that really matters to me, that I can see it happening. That's great. I just love it. So how can we build that feeling of inspiration, of the feeling that moves us to action? And that doesn't come from me putting out a load of information. It comes from me talking to people. We're all different. You could take museums' approach to current affairs is either, oh, we're neutral, we sit on the fence, we don't have an opinion, which is just not true. Or there's the one where you do it in terms of current affairs. So what somebody high up in a museum has read in The Guardian that moment, oh, we must do this. It's totally wrong. As Tony, I think, said, museums are, how can we help people hold a more creative and long-term vision, one that's not governed by a 5-year election cycle? So what would I want in 15 years' time? What would each of you want? And the only way that we can work that out is to talk about it. And that's, I'm going to stop there because I'm probably up to my 5 minutes. But that's my plea for this, is that we absolutely must speak to people to connect with people from their own position. And absolutely, I firmly believe we must believe that people are ultimately good and that they want to do the right thing. I heard an economist once said to me, oh, well, of course, we economists, we all work on the principle that everyone is ultimately selfish, which is extremely depressing, but explains a great deal. So while economists and politicians might live in a world where, you know, society exists within the economy, it's the other way around. So looking at how we can make things very, very congruent, where we have each of us contributing in society on the things that matter to us, participating, that's how we will build a strong society and support a strong environment. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks very much to all our speakers. I was really interested in the idea that, of course, museums are long-term institutions. They've tended to sort of collect over decades and even hundreds of years. But that notion that museums are changing and we need to be thinking long-term into the future. And those points about museums needing to inspire people, choices, whether that's about action or choices. So we're open for questions. We have a roving mic, so please indicate if you'd like to ask a question. And I think somebody's monitoring the live stream as well for questions. When you get the mic, please let us know your name and where you're from. Address your question. But I'll just kick off with a sort of question around what do you think is not working? What's not working well?
Okay, so I'll kick off. But I think museums have become, this is just feel free to disagree, it's totally fine. I think, can you hear, is that okay? So I think museums have come to become very good at engaging people with the museum, slightly at the cost of connecting people with the world. And so if we look at, so as museums slightly struggle to find a purpose for themselves, that's better. So just for argument's sake, could I just have a quick show of hands of who's come across the Sustainable Development Goals? Right, great. That's a lot better than it has been in the past. Wonderful. So 17 ideas to transform our world by 2030 so that no one is left behind. You know, climate action is in there, equality, loads of good stuff, nothing to disagree with. It's just the best agenda for us to connect with. And I think we should all be talking about it. And maybe not talking about it all the time, but certainly connecting our work with it. That's me.
I mean, I think in terms of programming, I think museums are quite timid. I think they could be more adventurous, more ready to deal with controversial topics, and not perhaps always aspire to be quite so neutral and even-handed as they tend to be.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. But I think particularly, say, you know, if you look at archaeology and the way that is portrayed, and been guilty of this in the past, you know, archaeology reflects that climate has changed, but often that is used without explicitly saying it, but to say, well, it's going to change again, so what have we got to worry about? There's quite a big risk around that. And I think particularly, you know, I spent a long time in the environmental sector, there's a big disconnection between museums and the environmental sector that has been allowed to grow up, if you like, for whatever reason. Somehow we need to tackle that connectivity back into the environmental movement.
I think there's a there's still a problem with a culture of loss in our sector. And many of our museums' origins come from loss. I used to run a rural life museum in Suffolk, and the whole of the collection was about loss rather than about change. And the same applies to industrial museums, and the whole reason that these things were collected back in the 60s and 70s was reflecting a tremendous change in our industrial society or our rural life. So, and I still think in many parts of our sector we haven't got over that loss. And if we frame the climate challenge as loss, then we're going to fall into the same trap that we found ourselves today. I remember reading Robert Hewison's book, The Heritage Industry, 30 years ago, and there's still bits of our sector that really haven't moved on from that culture of lamentation and loss. And I would challenge us as a sector that we really must be about change, about transition, and not about loss.
Who would like to ask a question?
Kate Arnold-Forster, Director of the Museum of English Rural Life and University Museums at the University of Reading. We have recently redeveloped a very traditional rural life museum, and one of our objectives was to re-engage our museum with the rural communities from which our collections came. We're based in a university in a very diverse town, and I hope we have been successful in that. And one of the things that we have set up is a programme that invites our newly engaged rural communities to think with us about our programming. And we have been very open about this. This really has not been about me reading The Guardian and suggesting to them. And they have produced a series of issues that they are now busy programming with us. And slightly to my amazement, our next one will be on Brexit. They've decided they want to do that. They wanted we've already just done a project on mental health in rural communities and rural isolation, and then also one about planning. So very, very different from the agendas that our rural communities were originally part of this process. And I am it's in my mind, and I'd just be interested to know how you feel we can kind of sort of transform that and kind of hook that onto the Happy Museum agenda, because it sort of chimes with something that Tony, you're talking about here. And I feel concerned that, we want to, I'm absolutely delighted we're a safe place and a forum for them to be having these discussions, but where do we go from here?
You're already there. I mean, I think what we found a lot, and Hilary, who's the current director of Happy Museum as well, we found that a lot of the things have seeped into people without really. And I find myself being in a room full of people that are going above and beyond what we were suggesting in the first place. So I think a lot of this sounds as though framing global issues in a local context is
very, very interesting. There's this whole world going on out there looking at our heritage. That better? Yep, sorry. So looking at parish plans and conservation areas assessments and local communities being engaged in them. So how do you link museum into that, and what do you do even with the products of that? So we had lots of Millennium maps, beautiful maps done for Millennium by local parishes. Where are they all? Deteriorating on church walls generally. That sort of thing. So there's something we're missing around how you engage with the community, planning, design guide, all that stuff that's out there. And I don't think we've cracked that yet. And if anybody's got really good ideas, it would be interesting to hear them.
Thank you. A couple of years ago, I did some workshops on collection-based audience development, and we had a very interesting case study, actually, somebody from a rural museum who was saying that were really trying to engage with communities of Eastern European workers who were coming, and actually they were just finding it very hard to relate the stuff that they actually had in their collections to the community that was now around them, and there just seemed to be a complete mismatch really between the physical stuff that they had and the needs and interests of their audience, which I think sort of comes back to the point that I was making before. But I think there are, you know, opportunities for really imaginative reinterpretation and re-examining of some of this material that we have. There are all sorts of stories sort of locked into this material and how it came to be and you know what it's doing there, which we're possibly not tapping into. So, you know, trying to sort of make more creative use of the stuff that we've got, but then also not just doing programming, but saying, well, okay, how is this actually manifested in the material culture, which is actually our kind of raison d'etre.
So just to say something about where museums tend to be situated often is in city centres, as access to green space is one of the measures of deprivation that museums can, I'm not sure, I'm just making this up now, but if museums can be that kind of place to help introduce people to countryside when they maybe don't, it wouldn't. So in Manchester not long ago, we had a group of kids and one of them said the countryside, they thought the countryside was somewhere you had to pay to go. And if it's not part of your world, you're not going to know. Yeah, and I think that as we move towards an increasingly urbanized population, increasingly urban, you know, worldwide, it's like rather than this idea of urban and rural as, you know, as some kind of hard and fast split, what are the bits that we can take forward for more sustainable communities?
A really interesting project was in Reading, the other side of Reading, catchily titled "Where's Reading Heading?" And Reading Museum worked with town planners and the university and other people with the council and local communities to explore the kind of town they wanted it to be into the future. So you had these professionals who would be at the sharp end of decision making alongside communities, being inspired by the cultural heritage of the city and the place. And I don't know whether it's because I'm now kind of a middle-aged man, I'm finding that I'm kind of harking back to work that happened in the 90s as great. So the work of Common Ground back in the 90s and Sue Clifford and Roger Deakins' work was amazing. And so their work was absolutely rooted in place. They talked about local distinctiveness and they used phrases like, you know your place, hold your ground. And it's as though some of those values and work needs to be sort of reinvigorated. But yeah, if you don't know about Common Ground's work, it is absolutely inspirational and really, really worth checking out.
And I think there's something just to follow on really important about museums always being true to their purpose, but not always being absolutely bound by their collections, because I think sometimes it's through those sort of projects that interesting contemporary collecting follows, but sometimes you have to just sort of take that leap of faith, still being true to what the museum is about, but not necessarily feeling that you're sort of overly constrained by your historic collections. Any more questions? Hilary.
Hello, I'm Will Dragassis. I'm a visitor service assistant at Rowan Baths. And my question is, what do you think the role of front of house is in making museums more accessible and through these tasks, making them about an environment? What's the role of front of house and getting them to engage with that project? Because together, us two here have created a group to try and promote front of house in museums, and we want to promote them through that. And we want interested what your views are on that subject.
I'll kick off. So I mentioned before about this thing that this isn't about us trying to turn the public into deep green environmentalists. This is about speaking with people about, you know, what are their so how can we meet people from their own position in front of visitor services staff are completely crucial in this, because what we're looking at here is how you deploy some of the science, if that's what people want, but how it absolutely always must be emotionally intelligent. So how we don't frighten people, because that's worse than doing nothing, who needs it, but how we can make sure that it's a constructive experience. That's crucial.
And I just think at the most fundamental level, it's about making everybody welcome and feel like actually they belong there. And there is quite a little bit of research that for many people they do find cultural institutions quite intimidating places, and actually kind of are sort of wondering whether they should even be there in some cases. And actually I think the front of house and the way that front of house staff and volunteers engage and welcome actually can make all the difference between an environment that it sort of encourages some of the sorts of things that we've been talking about, and a slightly uncomfortable experience.
Is that better? There you are, see? The light doesn't need to be on. It's interesting, technologically. It's interesting, I think, what is front of house? Very different in different places. I come from a museum where you had only volunteer front of house, so what does that mean in comparison to some with lots of stuff? Just to tell you, the best experience I ever had of front of house was in Lisdoonvarna in the Republic of Ireland. Different business model, if you like. Big room, big three-dimensional model of the landscape. And the front of house was the guy with the Irish blarney who told you the stories about it. And although he'd obviously learned his script, he told you all these other things. And actually, that way of engagement was fantastic. And it reinforced all those messages about, we're here, it's going to have an exciting time. The challenge, particularly when you look at somewhere like St Albans, was how, and later Torquay, was how do you make that happen in somewhere constrained by money? And we tried it by finding volunteers and trying to get that enthusiasm to be able to tell the story. So you're partially interpreting things. It's a bit like the National Trust guide thing, which I hate because they sit in the corner and just intimidate you. But if you can get it right, I think there's a really, really critical role. I can say that because I worked for the National Trust for a while. There's a really critical role for front of house. The problem is resource, because sometimes you're just dealing with a huge queue of people waiting to buy a ticket.
Will's Twitter feed is really worth following, actually, and yes, it's very good. I mean, I don't think there's anything specific regarding the things that the subject we're talking about today, but some really basic things like ensuring front of house are involved in planning, in project planning. So you've got a representative from front of house every time you develop a program. You encourage your front of house to use. So we use a tool called empathy mapping, where we put ourselves in the sort of minds of a potential visitor of a certain type, and then we would get all our front of house staff and back of house staff to use that as a means to try and understand our visitors a bit more. So I think it's making sure the gap between, the thing between front and back of house is more permeable, making sure that front of house have got a say in how you develop work, and allowing individuals at front of house to flourish, as Phil said, just to we are appointing people with their personality as well as their knowledge, and we've got to let both of those things shine through.
And I think front of house are critical in terms of telling you whether things that have been planned are actually working. They're brilliant, aren't they, for informal evaluation? So, yeah, absolutely support what Tony's saying about the importance of getting front of house teams or representatives involved in planning of exhibitions and programmes. Any more questions?
Hi, Hilary Jennings, also from the Happy Museum. It's a thought really that's just come to me while you were talking rather than a question, but it'd be interesting to hear your response. One of the things with thinking about climate change as a challenging subject is sometimes to come at it at a tangent. And what I'm hearing, and I heard at the Museums Association conference last week, was very difficult discussions around collections, around what we keep and what we maybe don't keep and how we manage that. And then also difficult conversations in broader life around consumption, around our relationship with stuff. And whether there's something in those tangential conversations that would make both of them easier. If you could bring together a conversation around museum collections and around our relationship with stuff, might be a way into both of them. Just a thought.
Okay, so it is on now, I think, yeah. So, because of course, sustainable consumption, it is on, yeah. Sustainable consumption is one of the SDGs. I am like a stuck record with these SDGs. So we're involved in there's a big project run by Rodney Harrison at UCL about assembling alternative futures for heritage. which is looking at because heritage is thought of in very different ways and different practices, and looking at a way that we can kind of bring these together, which is taking the idea that heritage is the building blocks for the future. And so it's like taking practices from one sector and seeing how they can be applied elsewhere. So one of the people who's involved in it is a professional declutterer. She declutters people's houses, and she's working with I think she's working with a museum in Yorkshire. That's a bit of a guess. But it's a great project, and it's looking at, well, how can we break out? So when we talk about the future, it means really different things to different people, and how can we think about and plan for long-term futures?
Yes, and I mean, I think it was, Alison was talking about the, people are now starting to question the model of GDP, and that economic model of growth, I think, is now in the spotlight. And I think that when the Mendoza Review calls for sensible growth of collections, what does that actually, what might that look like? And I think we're just really at the start of thinking through how we might develop, rather than necessarily grow, our collections. And I think we just really don't have the tools or the processes or frankly the language at the moment to think about what sustainable collections development across the sector might look like, who might be involved, the sorts of criteria that we might need. And what we have at the moment is just a situation where 1,700 museums are all trying to take individual decisions about what to acquire and what to dispose of, without any means actually of knowing what everybody else has got in a routine way, and that doesn't really seem to be sensible. So I think, as part of the rolling out of the recommendations in the Mendoza Review, we need this sort of strategic framework and partnership across the sector. And I think one of the things that we should be thinking about is, okay, well, how might that help us get from where we are now to where we perhaps want to be in decades to come?
Yeah, I think it's hugely challenging, and one of the things to me particularly is about the culture of the profession. And I'm just as guilty as anybody else. I've worked in museums where you cannot even throw away that little tiny bit of wood that was once in the Victorian cabinet to screw it to the wall because it might be useful at some point in the future. And how do we get from this culture where we are inherent collectors to a culture where we accept that we can't go on endlessly collecting, and how do we engage people in that? And I think an awful lot of our public probably aren't aware we're still collecting a lot of the time. I mean, particularly not when you look at natural sciences stuff or things like that. So there's a double-edged challenge that is quite hard. I don't have any easy solutions.
I think if the HLF stop funding new museums, it might mean that we look more sustainably about what we've got. And so if I suggest, they take a 7-year holiday on funding new museums and investing in either social capital within that we create, or really addressing some of these collections issues. He says in the middle of a massive capital development, but I think it would probably channel our thoughts a little bit more. And to be fair, in the Mendoza Review, they do talk a little bit more about investing in the current infrastructure. But we are in this, we're just as guilty as the rest of society around growth. We're building new museums. We've built more museums over the last 20 years than we have done for the last 100. And we're as a profession, we are locked in this cycle of growth, and we need to look at ourselves as much as we look at the world.
I think we've got time for a couple more questions.
Hi, I'm Libby. I'm studying service design at the Royal College of Art. I have a question. So you mentioned the SDGs and the Sustainable Development Goals. I work very closely with many organisations trying to work towards them. And I know that the 17th goal is partnerships for the goal, which is this giant meta goal, trying to get partnerships for all the other 16 goals. And through my work, I think it was with NASA, that, they've come out with this research that says that, you know, the best way to make sort of successful discoveries and be successful in a team is to have these massive, not massive, well, it can be any size, but interdisciplinary teams where you have, you know, people from the extreme ends of the bell curve. And I'm sorry if, you know, my lack of museum industry knowledge shows here, but I'm wondering, sort of, is there or are there any projects currently at the moment which link museums to people who, or organisations who, you know, you wouldn't necessarily think of when you think of climate change or museums, to kind of create this sort of space where you can engineer serendipity and create this positive change? Yeah, that's the question.
Yeah, so last week there was a thing called the Science Centre World Summit in Tokyo. I mean, who would organise that to be at the same week as the MA conference? It's just bonkers. And so there was, they signed off on a thing called the Tokyo Protocol, which is about science museums in support of the SDGs. And so the conference was themed around the different goals. And so we had one that was about partnerships for the goals, Goal 17, that I was in. And the thing what I was trying to say with that is that museums occupy... so I work in a university museum, and in the same day I could be talking to someone from the United Nations, or I could be talking to a member of the public. I'm not to say that those are opposite ends of some kind of spectrum, but it's to say that those two people would never come across one another. And so this is one of the strengths of museums. And I've set up an initiative called Museum Partnerships for Future Earth. That's one of these. It's, you know, there's a knowledge platform for partnerships for the SDGs. It's very flexible at the moment. Nothing has worked out, but I'm really interested in looking at how we bring together basically people and organisations that are interested in a forward-looking frame, how we can work stuff out together. So it would be great to talk to you.
So I think that, museums have been working with artists for quite a long time, but I think that there's huge scope to do more for museums to bring in a variety of artists in different, working in different media, to really explore issues in a way that actually you can't really get to the heart of them through, you know, nicely written text and sort of properly structured exhibitions. Actually, artists can sort of come in from left field, can really kind of cut through to the emotional heart of a subject, and I think there's a lot more scope for doing that, you know, not just in art galleries, but in interventions and sort of artistic comments on existing museums, and you know, perhaps, you know, routinely involving artists in the creation of new galleries, for example.
Yeah, it's interesting. Combining several things that people are saying before, one of the things we tried to do in Torquay was, you know, to link the museum to the green space within the town, the city, use projects that were going on that were run by other people, so, you know, the sports sector, and particularly things like the Kurdish community, where there was a whole study done on how much they were scared of the natural environment in Britain and didn't understand it. So it was working with sort of social services around that, and then using art as one of the key vehicles for engaging people in that. And the connectivity for the museum was the fact that we could host those explorative workshops, and we could host the products that were produced by them, and we could, if you like, demonstrate that community connectivity and get people to pay at the door to come in, which helped.
Yes is the answer. Is a great thing we should do, and I think Wellcome Collection offers there's plenty of really good examples of Wellcome of what you've done. And we were involved in a project called Stories of Change, or now it's called Energetic, working with the University of Sheffield and a guy called Joe Smith, who part authored the Do Good Lives Cost the Earth, but he is also the chairman of Smith of Derby, which is a big clock maker. So we work with clock makers, with neuroscientists, with printmakers, with a company that makes components for Formula One racing cars, all together in a couple of days, talking about manufacturing for the future. And one of the things that we have, that museums have in spades, is this ability to contextualize current events in terms of the long term. You know, through our collections, we are able to to explain why we have reached the place we are, and it's working in an interdisciplinary way, which we'll look at where we're going next. But I don't think we can do it on our own. You're absolutely right, I think.
Time for one final question.
My name is Chris. I'm from an organisation called Culture Unstained. I think I'm sort of forming a question which is around interdisciplinarity and intersectionality as well. So I'm mindful that we sort of often talk about climate change as opposed to climate justice, and that the impacts of climate change are not this othering, not environmental and ecological on their own, but are also human and will disproportionately impact people in the global south, people of colour, and operates along colonial lines. And a lot of collections within our museums and our cultural institutions have originated along similar lines as well, and there's possibly an opportunity to have a slightly more critical engagement with those collections. And also maybe problematizing this traditional notion of the museum as a neutral space for discussion and exchange of ideas. I sort of question what is the role or the value of that space to communities or marginalized communities where that relates to their history and their heritage, and then are seeing the effects of climate change play out along similar colonial lines. And is there some kind of richer narrative we can build in that space which maybe draws upon Indigenous people's knowledge or the knowledge of BAME communities, and really bringing that to the fore more?
Absolutely. So one of the projects we're involved in it's called Troubled Waters, which is about heritage in times of accelerated climate change, and it's working with a number of coastal sites in Britain, but also in Kiribati, which spelt Kiribati, apparently it's pronounced Kiribati. And so we had a visit because we have a lot of material in Manchester from Kiribati. It's your standard coconut armour with the pufferfish helmet. Lots of places have them. And so we had it's a research project. It's looking at, well, what would that community need from us, and what story would they like us to tell, so that it's not a story of of a passive, underprivileged people who were because these people they'll have to move, either voluntarily or they'll be forced to move. So they say that their line between life and death is different to what we have in the West. So if they move, they might have to dig up all their ancestors and take them with them. And it's very painful and it's very complex. And that puts a big responsibility on museums such as our own. And so I was saying, well, what would you want us to do with this? And he said, well, just look after it, and find ways to tell this story. But as we're moving forward, as things will change increasingly rapidly. Our museums are going to become more and more out of date. They're not going to. This idea that collections reflect society, they just don't. But they're just going to become, fossils of a time past. So, but I totally agree with you.
I mean, you mentioned earlier that one of the kind of things people say when talking about climate change is, oh, well, the climate has changed in the past and, nothing disastrous happened. And I think one of the things that we can use collections for is actually showing the huge impacts that past climate change, which is much more limited, and this is the point that actually, a very small change in the past has led to huge migrations and changes in environment, and actually those changes are reflected in our collections, and the point being that actually the changes that are to come are far greater than anything that has been seen already. So actually by looking at the widespread changes on human societies that past changes have caused, you actually get some idea of the scale of the likely future impact.
Yeah, I think that it's quite right. The big challenge, particularly having been in a smaller museum, is you don't have the knowledge within the staff of what the collections can tell you. So how do you glean those changes? And then how do you portray things at a really big scale? So, Torquay had Kent's Cavern, the home of the earliest Homo sapiens fossil in Western Europe. 2 miles away, cliff, and that had all been a huge plain. It's now the sea. How do you tell those stories, and how do you tell the fact it's going to change? And then, how do you get over the politics of, for example, we had a big ethnography collection that was displayed in your traditional way with a lovely story about the people who went out and collected it in a very colonial way with only a tiny little apology. But if we started talking to the local authority about changing things, they were our 30% funder. I have to say they were a conservative authority. They were not happy with the idea of us doing something radically different. So there's some interesting politics sometimes in this, and being brave about, I don't think a museum can ever take an impartial view. I think we always interpret something. We interpret social history for each generation, but we have to attempt to reflect, particularly in the science agenda, the consensus of science. We don't want to get into that situation that we see on the BBC of one climate change denier equally given prominence to one climate change scientist. So somehow we've got to do that, and I think it's really important we do. No, not so much, unless they're Nigel Lawson.
The only thing I think I can add is that yes, museums aren't neutral spaces. We're complicit. We are complicit as institutions in colonialism and privilege, because we are these repositories of assorted acquisition, theft, however you want to describe it. But we are where we are, and most town museums in our country have got material from around the world, and we need to tell the story of how we acquired them, and be very honest about how we acquired them, and how we label them, how they're documented. And we're just going through a program in Derby called Your Place in the World, and we have a collection of about 1,400 objects from around the world, and we're basically taking these objects for walks around the city, and we are visiting all the communities in our city where we know there is low participation in our activities, and we are having conversations with diverse communities about what these objects mean to them, even if they are not connected with the places where they live. But just so that there is this feeling of a connection with the wider world out there than just your locality. And I think this goes right back to the sorts of things we talked about earlier on, about placing global challenges in a local context so that we can all feel as though there is something that's relevant to us.
Thank you. That's time up. So to thank you for great questions, and to thank our panel for their excellent provocations. Thanks very much.
Thanks to our panellists and to Isabel. I think we've already heard so many interesting points and important points being raised this morning. And this afternoon, we're going to get much more into what individual organisations are doing and how they are dealing with these kind of issues, and what practical responses are happening. So we will come back at 2 o'clock. We've got lunch now. Lunch will be served outside. Take the time to talk to everybody, talk to Good Energy, and check out the exhibitions. And sign up for your discussion groups. And we'll see you back here at 2 p.m. Thank you.